My husband told his boss he turned down a promotion because his wife couldn't handle the kids alone, so I took a job an hour away and gave him 8 weeks to prove who couldn't handle what. At his company's holiday party last December, I overheard my husband telling his boss why he'd turned down a management position. He said, "My wife works part-time, and honestly, she barely keeps things together as it is. If I took on more hours, the whole house would fall apart." I stood there holding my drink, watching him shake his head like some kind of martyr sacrificing his career for his struggling family. His boss, a man named Aldrich, put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Family first. That's admirable." What my husband didn't mention was that I work part-time because he threw a fit 3 years ago when I got a full-time offer, screaming that the kids needed me home and that I was being selfish. 2 weeks after that party, I got a call from a firm I'd interviewed with months ago, offering me a senior analyst position starting in January. When I told my husband that night, he laughed like I'd said something ridiculous and said, "You're joking, right? Who's going to handle the kids?" I set my glass down and said, "You are?" Week 1, I came home to find our daughter doing homework in the dark because he didn't know where we kept the light bulbs. When I asked why he didn't just turn on the lamp, he said it was broken. It wasn't broken. He'd unplugged it to charge his phone and never plugged it back in. Week 2, my son's teacher emailed me asking why he'd worn the same shirt for 3 days straight. I forwarded the email to my husband without a word. He called me during lunch furious and said, "You're really going to let strangers humiliate me instead of just helping?" I said, "The washer instructions are printed on the inside of the lid," and I hung up. Week 3, I got a call from his mother. She said he'd called her sobbing, claiming I was abandoning my family for a career phase. Her voice was careful when she said, "Sweetheart, I know you've always been ambitious, but don't you think the children need their mother right now?" I said, "They also need their father. He's standing right there." She went quiet and said, "Well, I raised him to be a provider, not a babysitter." I didn't respond. Week 4, the school nurse called me during a client meeting. My son had fallen on the playground and needed to be picked up. She said she'd tried my husband 8 times with no answer. I excused myself from a $200,000 account review, drove 40 minutes, and found my son in the front office with dried tears on his face. That night, I found my husband in the garage organizing his golf clubs. I said, "The school called you 8 times. He didn't look up. He said, "I was busy. You handled it." I said, "I left a client meeting worth more than you make in a year." He shrugged and said, "See? This is exactly why you shouldn't be working full-time. You can't do both." Week 6, he sat me down and said, "This isn't working, and I think you need to quit before you destroy everything." I said, "Absolutely not." He said, "The kids are miserable, the house is falling apart, and you're never here when it matters." I said, "I'm home every night by 6. You're the one who's never present." His jaw tightened, and he said, "Fine. I'm going to tell Aldrich exactly what your little job experiment has done to this family." The night of my first quarterly review, my manager told me I was exceeding every benchmark. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. When I walked through the front door, I found my husband sitting rigid on the couch across from Aldrich, who was perched on the edge of a chair staring at the carpet. My husband's eyes were red. He'd invited his boss over to prove that I was the problem, but the kitchen behind them told a different story. Dishes crusted in the sink, cereal scattered across the counter, a permission slip stuck to the refrigerator with a date circled from 3 weeks ago. Aldrich stood up slowly. He looked at my husband and said, "You told me your wife couldn't manage. You made me feel sorry for you. I gave the Whitmore promotion to Jensen because of your situation, and Jensen relocated his entire family across the state for that role. You couldn't survive 8 weeks of what she's done for years." He picked up his coat, walked to the door, and turned to me. "We're expanding our analytics division next quarter. Call my office."